Let's instead talk to Ahmed Bedier, who's the president of United Voice for America, a non-profit civic engagement organization. He joins us live now from Tampa, Florida. Good evening, welcome. What do you think is going on in Saudi Arabia's court tonight?
I think there's a lot of turmoil. There's a lot of uncertainty. There are, different powers. I mean, Saudi Arabia is not some monolithic organization, even though they're all part of the royal family. There are different princesses, different factions, different groups. We definitely saw what happened last year or earlier when the crown prince rounded up all these rich billionaire princes and locked them up in the Ritz-Carlton and shook them down for money. Those princes are not going to forget what happened. And right now, the crown prince is weakened because he took a gamble, and what would seem like something that was carried out based on his orders is now backfiring in a huge way, creating an international crisis, probably something that Saudi Arabia has not faced in a very long time. And now the royal court in Saudi Arabia has to make some tough decisions, whether it's worth keeping the crown prince in his position despite all the international pressure and all the problems that's coming to Saudi Arabia right now.
Really? You think we might be seeing the possibility of his disengagement?
Well, it was interesting that the king is saying there were some rogue elements. How far do these rogue elements actually go within the kingdom? Does it go all the way up to the crown prince? There are articles saying that he has a history of bullying other people. He is the one that rounded up other princes, and some of them were even tortured. Some of them were killed. There are other princes that have been disappearing. I read something online in one of the articles in the Arab media saying that some 5 princes that tried to show up to speak to the king were arrested. So there's definitely some turmoil that's happening there. And I think any delay that's happening is trying to decide the fate of this crown prince, or will he allow the kingdom to suffer sanctions and other consequences? Because let's face it, the person that was killed here was not some sort of rogue dissident, some sort of anti-establishment individual that wanted to overthrow the government. This was somebody who was formerly on the inside. He was a consultant for the U.S. ambassador in the UK and in the United States. He's well connected. He knows a lot of information. This is somebody, one of their own, and it seems like just because he didn't cheerlead enough, he wasn't a dissident. He criticized some things, but because he wasn't fully on board, they went after them. And, dying, I think right now the story that's coming out with rogue elements and, he was killed in interrogation. Well, when somebody dies accidentally in a consulate, you call the paramedics. You call 911 in America. I don't know what the number is in Istanbul, but you call the paramedics. You don't bring out the bone saw and start chopping them up and then putting them on a plane and shipping them to do two or three different parts in the world. That does not seem like an accident to me.
Will the Saudis realize the gravity of this incident in the international community?
Well, they probably hope that this thing would just smooth over, but they obviously sent some amateurs. This is not the CIA. These are people that left a lot of traces, and it happened inside the consulate. I mean, there's no, and everything there, if you're in Istanbul, there are CCTV cameras everywhere. They know exactly where their movements are. I think the Turkish government did the right thing by disclosing what they have and that they have audio and video recordings. There's forensic evidence. And that's why they probably have to come clean and come up with a damage control story to try to say, you know what, these were rogue elements. There are bad actors. Every government, every country has bad actors, and they acted on their own. Probably not. When you have to fly out of the country and you have people that are part of the intelligence community, they don't just have, rogue elements. And I think this is going to continue. If you follow the evidence, it's eventually going to lead to the royal family directly, and they're going to have to make some changes or face some serious consequences. And I think that's where a lot of negotiations are happening right now. And hopefully some change will happen.
If you go back over the last 12 months and you look at news coverage of Saudi Arabia, much of it is quite generous, the suggestion of a reformist Saudi Arabia. Where does this leave its reputation now?
They spent billions of dollars on this international trip. I remember when he came to the United States, meeting with celebrities, hanging out with Zuckerberg, going to Facebook. This was the reformist. This is the person that allowed women to drive. This was the Western, loved by the Western people and in the United States, and had all these billboards and ads all of that within a week diminished completely. And so they spent so much on this and invested so much, not only the Saudis, but also the UAE. What the U.S. ambassador or the UAE ambassador to the United States, they spent so much money and so much energy putting up this image that this individual is a reformer, and then all of a sudden that has all vanished, and now they're seen as a liability. So definitely, this is a huge concern. And when you see that on the news that President Trump had said that there's going to be a price to pay, and the stock market plummets, and people are doing a sell-off in Riyadh in their stock exchange. Obviously, that's causing havoc and panic, and he's becoming a liability. And I think there's going to be some serious changes because I don't think people are going to buy the story that that it was an interrogation that went bad. Well, the steps after the aftermath of the interrogation has shown up until this morning. They were saying that they had nothing to do with it. They don't know where the whereabouts. Well, they've had plenty of time to come clean. I think now the story's catching up with them, and there's too much pressure, and they can't escape it. So there's going to be some serious changes that will have to be made.
But it is unlikely, is it not, that there are going to be political or economic sanctions placed on Saudi Arabia?
At one point, the most powerful Saudi in the West was the prince, the U.S. ambassador to the United States. And eventually, when he gambled with what he did in Syria, he paid the price and people were removed. It has happened before. People, if they go too far, if it's going to bring down the whole House of Saud, they're going to have to cut their losses and make some serious changes to satisfy other powers around the world. And right now, this is a huge embarrassment. This is a huge embarrassment. And it shows also the double standards in Washington, D.C. You know what? I'm an American citizen. I love my country, but I don't always agree with the foreign policy. But for a long time, especially we were speaking on TRT World, the United States and the foreign policy establishment goes, makes such a huge deal about what's happening in Turkey and tries to depict Erdogan as some sort of authoritarian or dictator. What do you call this? When you actually have people dying inside your consulate. I remember when there was a visit by Erdogan to Washington, D.C., and there was some fighting between protesters that happened outside, and Washington members of Congress were making a huge deal about the fighting that happened there and trying to blame Erdogan and the government there for what happened there. Well, that's nothing compared to actually murdering a U.S. resident inside a Saudi consulate. And the response hasn't been as forceful. Sure, there have been members of Congress like Jerry Conley, who's from Virginia, and Tim Kaine, because Jamal was a resident of Virginia. So they're making a big issue about it. And, there are more and more, obviously the Washington Post, because he was a columnist there, but it's nowhere near the type of uproar that happened during that incident with Erdogan. So there's obviously a double standard. There's a special relationship between the United States and Saudi Arabia. And a lot of it has to do with oil. So I think some changes will have to be made.
Ahmed Bedier in Florida, thank you very much.